Hey guys, we'll give everybody another minute or two to settle in here, and then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kelsey Helsper, and I'm a BCBA at Bierman. And tonight we're going to be talking about daily living skills. So before we get started, I'm gonna talk about our objectives. So tonight we're going to identify different types of daily living skills. We're going to identify how to break those tasks into smaller steps, identify what prompts are best to use and how we can fade out our prompts, and identify how to build in reinforcement to increase motivation. So before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we can communicate during this webinar, especially if you haven't attended one of these before. If you see at the bottom of your screen, you should have something that says chat. That seems to be the best way for people to communicate during this. So if you can maybe type, just a word in the chat just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable using that, that would be great. And then we can get started. But there is also a feature called raise hand. I will say that's just a little bit harder for me to navigate while I'm in presenter mode. So yeah, if you feel comfortable using the chat, we'll just do that. Awesome. Something else I will mention too. So whenever you are in the chat, it says at the bottom right above where you're going to type, it has two, and then it can either say all panelists and all panelists and attendees. So I am the panelist. So if you do just the panelists, I will only be able to see your responses. But if you click on all panelists and attendees, then everybody in the webinar will be able to see. So it's your preference, whatever you're comfortable with, but those are just the options that you have. All right, thank you guys for typing in the chat. We'll go ahead and keep going, but you can use your raise hand feature if you for some reason can't access the chat and need a little bit of help. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to take a poll. So I'm going to start the poll and then you'll see it pop up on your screen. But I just want to know how much ABA experience each of you has. So let me launch this. All right, and then you can just click your answer. Thanks, Treva. I can definitely stop sharing. And then start again. Okay, is that better? Perfect. Okay. All right, so it looks like several of you have had here, and you guys can see the results. So 50% of you have been in ABA for a while now, and the rest of you have anywhere from no experience to about a year of experience. So kind of all over the board. And it'll be great to get some different experiences and share some things together um, so that you're able to get feedback from other people too. Okay. Now somebody says can't see the poll answers. Okay. Can you still see my presentation? Yes. Okay, good. Okay. So we're going to take another quick poll actually right now. So I'm going to share another poll, but I want to know that roughly the age of your children as well, so that we can get a good idea of how we can talk through some of those expectations based on your child's age when it comes to daily living skills. All right, so it looks like we have a couple people that fell between the 9 to 13 or older range, but the majority of you have um, between 5 and 8 year olds. So we'll talk more about that and how that's relevant to daily living skills when we talk about what the expectation should be for your child and how we can kind of work on those things based on their age and where they are developmentally. So thank you guys for sharing. So we're going to first start talking about what daily living skills are. So daily living skills are a wide range of routine self-care tasks that a person completes on a regular basis. So some examples of those could be toothbrushing, dressing and undressing, toileting, preparing your own food or feeding yourself with utensils, housekeeping activities, getting groceries, those are just a very small amount of daily living skills, but those were a broad range of skills that are lumped into this daily living skill umbrella. So we'll talk more about some more specific skills, and then I would love to hear from you guys later on. We'll have a chance to kind of share some of the daily living skills your kids might be struggling with at home, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end as well, if you guys have questions about specific ones. Okay, so why these skills are important? Since these tasks are a part of every person's everyday life, it's important that a person is able to complete them with as little assistance as possible. So it not only improves the overall quality of someone's life to be able to be as independent as possible, but yeah, it increases independence and just makes them, more confident to live their daily lives. So most of these tasks are learned as young children. So the earlier we can teach them, the better. So it is really important to start thinking about your long-term goals for your child. Obviously, there are several different options to consider. So when thinking about that, think about if your goal is full independence for your child, how you can take steps to get there. Or maybe you think it would be more appropriate for them to be in an assisted living or full-time care, whatever you feel like your child's most like best scenario will be, then just make sure that you're always working toward those goals and making sure you can do what you can now to help them, get where they need to be in the future. So I would love to hear from you guys. So use the chat to do this, but I would love to hear you share some examples. So I would like for you to name one or more daily living skills that your child needs help to complete, especially if those skills are something that they really struggle to complete at home. And then also list the age of your child and how much support your child needs to complete that task. So any details that you have that would be relevant to them completing the task. So you don't have to go into thorough detail or anything, but just share an example. Okay, I'm going to start reading some of them. So 4-year-old will not brush teeth. So I would say that's a pretty common one. There's lots of different factors that can go into toothbrushing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Picking up toys at age 2.5. 6-year-old needing help with taking a shower and a bath. These are all great ones, you guys. Dressing, toothbrushing, toileting at age 7. Um, Age 5, dressing and bathing self and toileting. Perfect. So, yeah, it seems like we have some overlap with skills that have been difficult for you guys. And these are definitely ones we can talk more in depth about throughout this training. So, thank you for sharing. Okay. So, first, let's talk about age appropriate expectations. So, I lumped these categories based on the poll. So, based on the age of your child, you're going to have different expectations for what to expect when they're completing these tasks. So, if your child falls within that 1 to 4 year category, you're going to really try to encourage their participation, try to make the activity as fun as possible so that they want to participate in the activity. You're going to target component skills. So, component skills are the basic skills that somebody needs to do something. So, are they able to even hold the toothbrush the correct way? Are they able to squeeze the toothpaste? Do they have enough strength to do that? If it comes to toileting, are they able to pull up and down their pants by themselves? So, all of those key component skills that will help them to complete that task independently, targeting those things will help them to be able to be more independent. And then also focusing on tolerating. So, if you're really trying to brush teeth and they won't even tolerate the toothbrush in their mouth, then you can just work on tolerating through building in some reinforcement for that activity. And we'll talk a lot more in depth about that as well. But those are kind of the things that you'll really focus on if your child falls within that category. If your child falls within the 5 to 8 year old category, you're going to work on, so hopefully you will have worked on these other things prior to this in the other category. But then if you have worked on those things, you're going to try to be filling the gaps and working on those missed component skills. And you're also going to just continue to increase your expectation and increase their independence by fading back and fading your involvement in the activity. So then if your child falls in the 9 to 12 year old category, they're getting older, they're wanting to be more independent. You're going to really focus on that and try to get them to be as independent as possible. And you're going to continue to just fade those prompts. And you can start building in less intrusive prompts. So something that we do pretty regularly for clients who need it is create some visual, like a picture, um, a visual schedule to follow, or maybe it's just a picture prompt. We can start to build in some of those things so that they rely more on that, and that can be available to them in any environment rather than them relying on you all the time. And then if your child falls within that 13 or older category, again, you're going to really, really focus on that independence, getting them to be as independent as possible. And then those reinforcement systems that I talked about, or actually, so you could build in those picture prompts, but then you could also build in reinforcement systems like a check system or a token economy or something like that, so that they are getting reinforcement throughout those activities, but you're not having to monitor that activity as much. So there's lots of things you can do at any age level to help build their independence, but that's just kind of a general um, overview of where your focus should be if your child falls within that category. So then let's talk about how we can start teaching some daily living skills. So, why are these skills so difficult to learn? So, the length of the task. So, thinking about, a morning routine. So, waking up, getting undressed, getting dressed, brushing teeth, going downstairs, getting breakfast ready, eating breakfast, you know, whatever your morning routine is for your child, the length of that task, can seem overwhelming to them. They can't really, if you're asking them a question or having them complete a simple one step task, they can kind of see the end is near for that task. With something that is larger, like a daily living skill task, sometimes it's hard for them to, think in those smaller steps. And it can be overwhelming to think of all the things they have to do before they can be done. Um, Also, if your child has physical limitations like gross motor and fine motor skills, it can just be a really difficult task for them to complete. So they could be getting overly frustrated because of their physical limitations. Also, if your child has a negative learning history with that specific task, so let's say, I'm trying to think of one. I keep going to toothbrushing, but let's say with toileting, they'd been doing really well with toilet training, and then all of a sudden they got scared for some reason sitting on the toilet, or something happened that made them have some type of traumatic response to that task, then that may be something that they're battling internally. They could just have developed a negative learning history with that specific skill, and it may be harder to overcome that because of that reason. Also, and I'll go back to toothbrushing for this reason, because sensory toleration can be something that they struggle with. So if the feel of the toothpaste in their mouth is, a sensory aversion to them, then that can be, a battle that you're going to have to overcome. Also with, bathing or anything like that, if they have an aversion to water, then that's going to be really difficult, and we're going to have to figure out how to, build in some reinforcement to make that task more fun for them. Also, with any of these daily living skills, it's likely that they're doing it in a distracting environment. So, if they have other siblings, it just being in the home in general and not in a really controlled center setting is already a little bit more overwhelming. So, that distracting environment could just have them, not focused on the task. And then, usually with those tasks, there's no real built in reinforcement. So when you think about all the steps that they have to complete, they're usually not even getting anything that they like after they've completed that task. So thinking about ways that we can build in that reinforcement for them and try to make it more fun and more desirable for them to engage in those tasks. All right. So what's going to be the first important step is just breaking those tasks down into smaller steps. So, we use something called a task analysis, which is the process of breaking down complex tasks into a sequence of smaller steps or actions. So, by doing this, we can kind of see how many steps it actually is taking for them to complete these tasks. We've been doing these tasks for a really long time, so they kind of seem like second nature to us. But for somebody just learning these things, that's a lot of steps at a time, and it can be overwhelming and hard to remember everything. So, what we do is we use different chaining procedures. So, what that means is we're linking the tasks together. So once we've identified the steps, then we can decide how we're going to start teaching those. So what we can do is we can teach it to them step by step from the beginning. Um, and maybe what we require is for them to complete the first step on their own, but then we give them help with the last remaining steps. We could also do a backwards chaining procedure where we give them help all the way through until the last step. And then we help them with the last step. And then from there, with forward or backward, once they master the step independently by themselves, you just start adding a step on. So if we're doing a backward chain and they've mastered doing the last step by themselves, then the next time, maybe try to have them do the last two steps by themselves. And when you feel like they've got that, add on the third last step. And then for a total task chain, you can just provide, as little assistance as possible throughout the whole task and just be trying to get them to be as independent as possible with all the steps at the same time. All right, so let's break toothbrushing down into this example and really talk about all the steps that are involved in toothbrushing. So, I know everybody kind of has their own way of brushing teeth. So, some of these for your child may be in a different order. But, first they're going to pick up the toothpaste, they have to open the toothpaste. So, think about the fine motor ability to do that, whether it be like a push cap or a twist cap. They're going to need to have the fine motor strength to be able to do that. They're going to need to pick up the toothbrush. They're going to need to squeeze the toothpaste onto the toothbrush, turn on the water, get the toothbrush wet, turn off the water. They're going to need to brush each quadrant of their mouth. So, at a certain age, if your child's 2 and just learning how to brush their teeth, it's not going to be as, your focus isn't going to be as much on the thoroughness of their toothbrushing, probably. But if your child's 9 and, they really want to brush their teeth independently, you're going to have to make sure that they are getting each quadrant of their mouth so that you don't have to worry about those issues, with cavities or anything in the future. Um, they're also going to need to turn on the water. If you have them rinse their mouth out, they're going to have to fill a cup with water, take a sip, swish the water around their mouth, spit the water out, rinse the toothbrush, turn off the water, put the toothbrush back, pick up the toothpaste, and put the cap back on. So you can see that's a lot of steps. So, for them to be able to remember that many steps, first and foremost, is going to be pretty tricky without any type of, visual reminder. But also, some of these things they might not be able to do independently. So you're just kind of going to have to see where they are, kind of meet them where they are in the moment, and figure out how we can start teaching them some of these things. Another thing you can do if you do realize, oh gosh, yeah, it is the toothpaste that's really difficult for them. You can practice, that motion of, let's say, if it's a twist cap, you can practice having them twist other caps and twist other things throughout their day to build up that strength a little bit. And it'll help them more whenever they're completing this activity. Um, so yeah, then I'm seeing some things in the chat here. So this one says, my daughter loves brushing her teeth, but she likes to eat the toothpaste. So yeah, that's a really, really tricky one because obviously once the toothpaste is in her mouth, you can't really do anything about it. She's probably going to swallow it. So I would say maybe just working on spitting and really getting that solid, maybe outside of toothbrushing even, or without the toothpaste might just help her if she knows what to do right away and you give her that direction. Um, she might spit it right out if you want her to. But yeah, that's a really tricky one. I would say for now, just make sure you're getting, those toothpastes that aren't as harmful, to be consumed. But I would say just to start working on the spitting out of things if you can, and maybe start with something that she doesn't necessarily love to have in her mouth, like if she could care less about water or maybe like another beverage that she doesn't really care for, maybe try that. But yeah, I saw another comment is my son needs help with spitting and rinsing after toothbrushing. And I've seen that with several of my clients actually. And that can be a really difficult thing to teach. So I think I've seen the most success with modeling. So what you could do is you could get your own cup and you could be practicing next to them to kind of show them what the expectation is. Um, you could try it with something else, like I mentioned, with that they don't really love to have in their mouth. Um, but yeah, that can be a really hard thing. I would say modeling is probably the best prompt to use for that specific step, just because you can't really force them to do it. Um, and then another one, so my son puts the toothbrush up to his mouth, but does not put it inside of his mouth. So it's great that he's picking up the toothbrush and it's great that he knows to put it to his mouth. Think back to those things that make the task difficult. So Does he have an aversion to having the toothbrush in his mouth, like a sensory aversion? Um, does he just not want to complete the task? Is he just trying to avoid it? Try to think about ways that you can build in reinforcement. So maybe you count aloud and that's the prompt that you use. So um, you say, okay, we're going to put the toothbrush in your mouth for 10 seconds, and then you count aloud. And then after that 10 seconds, maybe he gets something he really enjoys, like tickles or singing a song or, a little video on the iPad, whatever it may be that he's really motivated for. Um, okay. Awesome. Yeah. This is a pretty common one that I see that can be tricky, but I mean, I think you can see now that when you break it down like this, there are so many things for them to remember, and so many different components of it, and not, every child's going to be different, and not every child's going to have the same problem. So I think by breaking it down like this, and writing it out for yourself too might be great. So you can kind of check off like, oh yeah, they can pick everything up, they turn on the water fine, and you can really get to the root of the problem if you can kind of see it in this way. All right, let's do another example. So, this is another common one that I've seen. Getting dressed can be pretty tricky for some kids. So, here are all the steps that I could think of. So, picking up the shirt, orienting the shirt in the right direction. So, I've seen a lot of kids be really successful with figuring out how to get the shirt on, but the shirt's not always, in the correct way. Or if they pick up a shirt that's inside out, are they going to know to turn it, the right way? Probably not. So think about teaching them how to orient the shirt in the right direction. They have to put their right arm in the shirt. They have to put their left arm in the shirt. They have to place their head in the shirt, pull the shirt down. If they're getting fully dressed, they have to pick up their pants. They also have to orient their pants in the right direction, put their right leg in, put their left leg in, pull the pants up to the waist. What I didn't add here, depending on the type of pants, they may have a zipper. They may have, a drawstring that they have to learn how to tie. They may have a button or a snap. So all of those things, fine motor wise, are they able to complete those things? Because those can be really tricky. With socks, can they pick up the socks, orient them in the right direction again, place on the correct foot, um, and yeah, do the same thing for the other foot. So you can see lots of steps that go into all of these things, lots of room for error, and for things that you'll have to teach them. So really just by breaking all of these things down into these smaller steps, like I said, you can find the root of the problem and you can really focus on those skills that you've identified as their deficits. You can work on them within the routine, but you can also work on them outside of the routine, or you can kind of get a better idea of what you need to start working on, with them. Okay, so let's dive into some of those limitations. So, when thinking about physical limitations, like I mentioned earlier, it could be gross motor, or it could be fine motor. So, think about what your child's limitations are. If you're really not really sure about that, you can always ask your BCBA or whoever your contact person is at Bierman, and we've probably done, at least an assessment or two to be able to give you an idea of some physical limitations that your child might have. But yeah, I would just say, start to notice what they're really struggling with. And I think too, I'm a parent myself, so sometimes I catch myself just doing stuff for my kids and not really giving them the opportunity to do it on their own. Sometimes it's because we're in a time crunch or it's just more convenient, but whatever it may be, really try to let your kids be more independent so that you are able to identify some of the ways that they're struggling. And then what to think about in regards to that. So, work on strengthening activities outside of that task. So, that may be something that you're not as comfortable identifying, and that's okay. Like I said, reach out to your BCBA, and they probably have some really great ideas about some activities that you could do. But, like I mentioned with the toothpaste, twisting the cap, you could work on twisting plenty of other caps, caps of containers in the kitchen or a water bottle, things like that. Um, with buttoning, if they have to learn how to button their pants, you can work on buttoning, anything else outside of getting dressed. So think about those activities that will strengthen those muscles that they need to be able to use. And then you can also, so if you are working on those specific things in isolation outside of the daily living skill task, you can also make modifications within whenever you're doing the daily living skill routine. You can make a modification for your child in the moment when they're doing that, so that they don't get super overwhelmed by the part that's really hard for them. Um, but then you can teach that outside of the task. And then when you're in the task, maybe then you give them a little extra physical prompt, or maybe you're gesturing or modeling to them what to do for that particular step. But we'll talk more about the types of prompts that you can use here in a minute. And then really, it's just important to focus on what you can. Especially if you have a child who really just will not tolerate the activity at all, it can probably seem pretty overwhelming to know where to start or to not really have an idea. They may have several of these components competing with their ability to complete the task. So, really just try to focus on what you can and try to focus on one thing at a time. So, we use something called Mascot at Bierman, but it includes a lot of these different things like motivation, structure, contingency, and teaching. So these are what we focus on in the center. And if we can develop this really solid foundation and ask ourselves these questions first, we can get a really good idea of where to start with the task, or where we may need some help in learning how to teach them. So, first, let's talk about motivation. So, really, is your child motivated enough for the activity? I'm going to assume if they're having a really hard time, they probably aren't motivated for the activity. So, think about how you can increase motivation. So, like I said before, there's not going to be a lot of built in reinforcement for these activities. They're not just going to naturally feel motivated, to brush teeth or get dressed or take a bath. So, if they're not motivated, how can you build in some of the other things that they are motivated for into the activity? So, one thing you can do is you can have them complete a step or maybe 5 steps, and then give them access to something they prefer. So, you can kind of build in the reinforcement that way, or give them frequent breaks throughout the task. Whatever they find reinforcing, you can just build it in that way. Um, you can also, and I'm not sure if any of you already have some experience with this, but we often use a token economy or a point system to help keep them motivated. So, um, if your child is motivated by a token system, we can say, hey, we're going to earn 5 tokens, and then you get, to go play in the playroom, or you get your favorite toy, or you get a Skittle, or whatever it may be. You can provide those tokens throughout the activity. So you're not really having to break up the actual activity by giving them reinforcement to something else and having to remove it again. But you can give them the tokens to kind of show them, yep, you're still doing what you're supposed to do. You're still on the right track. And then at the end of the activity, they can earn all of their tokens and get access to that reinforcement. So that's a really great way if if your child has a really difficult time transitioning between difficult tasks and reinforcement time. That can be a really great way to build some of that in. So if you ever feel like something like that would be appropriate for your child and they don't have anything like that in place, feel free to reach out to your BCBA, and we can even help create those materials for you. The next thing we're going to talk about is structure. So, I talked about earlier, the environment could just be distracting. Maybe, brother and sister are also brushing teeth at the same time, or are also, in the bath, or whatever it may be. It just might be really distracting for them to focus. So, how could we minimize those distractions? So, is there, a quieter place where we could go to practice the skill if it's harder? Or, if you're doing it with multiple kids, could you do just that activity, by yourself with that child? And are all the materials needed for the activity present and visible? So, if you're going in to do toothbrushing with your child, do you have the toothpaste and the toothbrush and the cup? Is everything already ready and available? Because if not, and you're having to spend a few minutes gathering all of those materials, then just that delay could be, triggering to them and they could say, nope, I'm out. Too much time. So just think about how you can minimize the amount of time that they have to complete these activities and how they can do it the most independently in the least amount of time and just set them up for success. Also, contingency. So, does your child understand when the task will be over? Like I said, with all of those steps in the mix, it can be hard to identify, when it's going to be over. I mentioned counting aloud. That's something with toothbrushing, like counting aloud for each quadrant can kind of help them understand, okay, I know she's going to count to five. Or, that can kind of help them internally feel like they know when the end is coming. So, making sure that they do understand when the end is going to be over. Or, maybe you say, "Hey, it's time to take a shower right now, but after shower time we can go watch, a show. Or after shower time we can go have a snack." Something like that, whatever they find motivating, telling them beforehand, "Hey, we're going to go do this, but when you're done doing this, we get to go do something you really like." Um, and yeah, like I mentioned, what do they have to look forward to after the task is complete? So right now, just think about that. If your child is getting dressed and it's a constant, wrestling struggle to get their clothes on them, what are they getting after that? Or let's say they have a really easy time one day, are you making a big deal out of that? Are you giving them lots of reinforcement and lots of praise for their compliance and their independence? If you're not, that's okay. Identifying it, is important right now, but think about ways that you can change your behavior to help increase their independence and their compliance with those tasks. Okay, so somebody in the chat says, my son really doesn't enjoy when I count. He says no. So I talked about having a negative learning history earlier. So he may have developed a negative learning history with counting in particular. It sounds like that could be the case. But if he doesn't, you could try maybe turning off your voice and just doing fingers to kind of show him, or maybe starting with five and counting down. um, you could also do a visual timer, so you could do one on your phone or something like that, because it could just be, it's something negative that occurred with the counting for him in the past. But I would say it's good that you've identified that that's not an appropriate way to prompt him, and I would say just find a different way that you can prompt him. Okay, and then let's talk about teaching. So, how and when will you correct the errors that occurred? So, we don't want our kids to continue just practicing errors as they're completing the task. So, when you're having them complete the task, and especially when you're moving on to them becoming more independent, you don't want them to start practicing errors because those can be really hard to correct after the fact. So, that's why we really encourage using a chaining procedure and really just tacking on one more skill at a time, because then we can really identify, okay, we've added too many. Now, now they're making errors, so we've got to scale back. So, just really getting a handle on that early and consistently as you're trying to build independence can help make sure you're minimizing errors. But if they start, let's say, with dressing, if you notice that they have started to they still get dressed, by themselves, but they haven't been paying attention to whether or not their shirt is forward or backward. And maybe you let it slide a couple of times, but now they're doing it every time. So just think about those errors that they are making and really try to make it clear to them, and take that step back to teach them, so that they're not continuing to practice those errors. Okay, so we've talked about some prompts a little bit, but let's dive into more prompts and what they mean and how you can use them. So, some different types of prompts that we use, and these are listed most to least intrusive. So, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. So, vocal prompts are great, especially if your child does a really good job following directions. So, basically, you're just giving them directions or corrective statements as the task is completed. So, if they are, let's say, trying to eat some lunch, you can say, "Hey, use your fork." And they pick up their fork and they do it on their own. So you're going to be able to figure out for your child, um, what vocal prompt is necessary. And you may have to use more, in the beginning than you do, when they do become more independent. But it could also vary just based on how much language your child has as well. And you may realize that vocal prompts aren't as effective for your child, and that's okay. There's also physical prompts. So we also refer to this as hand over hand prompts to complete the task. So basically, when I've used physical or hand over hand prompts, you're basically hovering kind of behind the child and really helping them to complete each step. Or it could just be one or two steps that they need more help with. So, but really, typically we use a physical prompt when there are some physical limitations or when the skill is really new and novel to them because they don't really know how to complete it on their own. And we want to try to avoid them getting overly frustrated. So, physical prompts can be used for that, um, to just kind of help ease into the activity or help them with the steps that they really have a hard time with. Um, I see another question here. So, what do I do if my son isn't familiar with holding the fork the right way? That's a great question. It's great that you've noticed that. I would say if you notice that he starts picking it up incorrectly, that I would just fix it and say, "Hey, we hold our fork this way." Um, and if you have the opportunity to just sit down with him while he's eating, maybe you can model how you're using your fork and kind of narrate that and talk about that as you're eating. And I would say, yeah, if he starts to make an error, just try to catch him as soon as he makes the error and fix it. And hopefully he's receptive to that prompt. But yeah, that I would just say as soon as you can identify an error, just start to practice it the correct way. So there's also gestural prompts. So that would be, like the name says, a gesture or a point or a cue toward completing a step. So if you are working on toothbrushing, and let's say they've been doing a great job with most of the steps, but let's say they forget to turn off the water whenever they're about to brush their teeth or at the end of brushing teeth, you can just point to the sink as a prompt and then they can do it on their own. So, rather than, so I like using gestural prompts more than using vocal prompts because gestural prompts can be a lot easier to fade. So that's the main goal too when thinking about all of these things is you want to make sure that you're going to, if you put in a prompt, that you're going to be able to take it out or you're going to be able to replace it with something less intrusive. So if you're just gesturing, maybe the first time you have to gesture, you have to point all the way to the sink and touch the sink even to show them that they need to turn off the water. And maybe the next time when you do it, you just have to, point to it for a second and then they get it. And then maybe the next time you just kind of gesture with your eyes toward the sink and then they get it. So think about the way that you can fade those prompts out because the ultimate goal is going to be for you not to be prompting them and for them to be doing it on their own. Model prompts, like I've mentioned a lot, they're really great as well. So just demonstrating to your child exactly what you want them to do. So watching somebody else do it, I've also seen kids be really receptive to video modeling, especially if your child is really interested in the iPad or technology, which I would argue to say most kids are in this day and age. But yeah, if videos are something that really, really motivate them, you might try video modeling. So you could videotape yourself doing something. You could find a video on the internet of them completing the steps. You could ask your BCBA to create a video for them so that they can follow the steps along at home. Um, or, you could just be standing there doing the exact same thing for them. So modeling can be a really great way to prompt them so that you're not being as intrusive. And then I briefly mentioned it before, but visual prompts are also really great. So, creating a visual schedule, which we'll go through some examples here in a minute, or even just a picture prompt of what to do, or like I said, video modeling. All of those things can be really helpful tools. And the best part about using those is that you're able to fade back. So, if you just have a visual schedule of how to go to the bathroom. So you need to sit down on the toilet, you need to go to the bathroom, you need to wipe, you need to flush, you need to wash your hands. If they're getting really good at that, maybe you can just have the picture prompts up on the wall for them. So they go into the bathroom by themselves. If they forget a step, they can look at that prompt, they can correct it themselves, and then you're not even having to get involved. So I think that's best case scenario if we have to maintain having a prompt in of any kind, they're going to be able to have that prompt wherever they go. So that's going to be a better prompt than, let's say, having to physically prompt them or even having to vocally prompt them, because when they're not in that home environment with you, and let's say somebody else is trying to get them to do something, it's likely that they're not going to do it in the exact same way as you. So thinking about how are they going to generalize these skills? How are they going to do it as independently as possible? So, really, while any of these prompts can be used, all of these prompts, whatever you find most appropriate for your child, use them, use all of them, try all of them out and see what is best. But like I said, it's just important to consider how you're going to fade out that prompt or fade to a less intrusive prompt. So, really, vocal and physical prompts are the most intrusive. If they start to rely on those prompts, they can be really hard to fade. Gestural and modeling prompts, like I mentioned in my example with gesturing, that can be really a lot easier to fade. And then visuals too. And not even that visuals would need to be faded. But all of those can be a lot easier to fade than physical or vocal prompts. So just think about that when you're building in a prompt. Just immediately think, okay, what am I going to do when I need to take this prompt out? Or, is my child relying on this prompt so heavily? How can I switch up my prompting so that they're not relying on it as much? Okay, so let's go through this example. So this is a visual schedule of a morning routine. So you're going to wake up, go to the bathroom, take off your pajamas, put on your clothes, eat, brush your teeth, comb your hair, and get on the bus. So as you can see with this visual schedule, there are a lot of components missing within these things. So if this broad of a schedule would not be appropriate for your child, you can break it down into even more thorough steps, or maybe you're just doing just the bathroom routine in a visual schedule. But if you had this up for your child in their room, they're going to know exactly what is coming. So this can be a really good way to understand the contingency of what's expected of them. You could even show them on their own personal visual schedule where reinforcement is going to be within this. Like, you're going to wake up, you're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to take off pajamas and put on clothes. Then you're going to get to watch, a 5-minute video. Then we're going to eat, brush teeth, comb hair, and then you can watch 5 more minutes before you get on the bus. So, whatever you think is appropriate for your child, this can be modified and individualized to fit their specific needs. Here's another one. So, making a sandwich. You get 2 slices of bread, put the peanut butter on, put the lid back, open the jelly, spread the jelly, put the cap back on, and then put it together. So, if you're child is really trying to get more independent and preparing their own food, a visual schedule can be a great way for them to identify the steps that they need to take. And then here's another one. So going to the bathroom. So a picture of the toilet. You're going to sit down and use the toilet, wipe, flush, put the seat down, and wash your hands. So, like I said, this can be catered to your specific child's needs. You could also use pictures of your own child if that's more helpful to them instead of these, clip art pictures. But whatever works best for your child, that's what you can use. So I know I mentioned it in a slide toward the end, but at the center, you can contact your BCBA or whoever your contact point is, and we would be happy to create these materials for you if you think that this is going to be a really good way for your child to learn. We'd be happy to help in any way that we can. And we can send all these materials home, and you can, meet with your BCBA to talk through how you can use them. All of those things are available to you. Yep, so here we go. That's exactly what I said. So our team's happy to create any materials that would help your child complete these. So just, talk to whoever your contact person is, and please let us know how we can help with that. I've gotten this question before, but you may be asking yourself, will my child need support forever? And really, there's no good answer for that because every child is different and has different needs. But here are some things to consider when thinking about that. So think about the intrusiveness of your prompts, like we talked about. Are your prompts going to be easy to fade? Is your child relying on your prompts heavily? So if they are, just think about ways that you can modify your teaching. You're going to fade your prompts as quickly as possible. So, if you start using this prompt and then the next time you realize you don't even need that prompt, then take it out and don't go back. So really think about how you can get your child to be more independent every single time that they complete that task and fade out your prompts as quickly as you can. Again, focus on reinforcement throughout and after the activity. Make sure that they are contacting reinforcement and just kind of play around with what schedule that might be. So how frequently they need reinforcement. So maybe at first you were waiting until the end of the activity to give them any reinforcement and the task didn't really go well. Then maybe the next time you give reinforcement halfway through and then at the end, and then maybe it goes a lot better. So just play around with what your child can tolerate and what they need. And then also something that can be really helpful is providing behavior specific praise. So a lot of the times we use words like good job, awesome, great job, all of those things. But we're not really telling them exactly what they did to deserve that praise. So instead, try to think about, hey, I like how you brushed all of your teeth all by yourself, or I really like how you remembered to flush the toilet this time, or I like how you used your fork the whole time while you were eating. Great job. So think about how you can be really specific with your praise so that they know what to do next time if they really enjoyed getting that praise. Okay, so before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to mention some of the upcoming webinars that we will have in the beginning of 2021. So on January 6th at 8, we are going to have an intro to ABA. So if you are newer to the field or you have more questions just about ABA in general, that will be a really good webinar to attend. And then also on January 20th, we're doing a webinar on Let's Talk, how to teach communication skills to young learners. So if you are a parent or caregiver wishing to increase your child's communication, or you have questions about their mode of communication or strategies about how to teach more communication, that will be a really good webinar for you to attend. And then just before we open it up to all questions, if you do have specific questions outside of this webinar and you don't know who to go to, if you're an interim care client, you will go to your interim care BCBA. If you're a potential client and you're not in interim care, you can contact the ACL of your child's specific location. If you are a current client, your child's BCBA will be a really good go-to. And then if you don't fit any of those categories, or you just feel like you need to contact somebody else, you can always email info@biermanaba.com. And before we open it up to questions, I will send this PowerPoint over to someone, and they will email it out to all of you tomorrow so that you will have all of this information as well. So let's talk about questions. What questions do you guys have? If you have specific examples you want to talk through, I'm happy to do that too. You can feel free to just type them in the chat. While you guys are typing out your questions, just in case anybody has to hop off of here before our questions are over, I just want to go over some of the key takeaways of this training. So really, most importantly, you're going to identify what skill you want to teach. You're going to break it down into those steps like we talked about with the task analysis so that you can really identify all the behaviors that go into that daily living skill. You're going to use the least intrusive prompt, fade it out when you can, and then you're going to reinforce compliance and independence. So build in that reinforcement, fade your prompts, just always work on that independence. But also something that's not added here, just really think about where your child is developmentally and what's age appropriate for them, and really try to focus, in that category. Don't make it, if they're 2 or 3, don't expect that they're going to be brushing their teeth all by themselves. But if they're 9 or 10 and they're really, consistently needing your prompts, then really try to work on that independence. So it is going to vary based on the age of your child and where they are right now. But just think about all of these things, and hopefully they can help to get them to be more independent. Okay. I'm going to read some of these. So, can BCBA provide task analysis lists for parents for skills? Absolutely. It's likely that if you've asked the BCBA to work on some of these things in the center, they probably even already have those steps listed out. So, contact them and they would be happy to get you those steps for sure. How can I do my child eat at his table and eating by himself? So, yeah, that can be tricky. I'm not sure of the age of your child, but it can be tricky, to get them to sit down and eat for the duration of the meal. So, I would say focus on where they are now. So, how long roughly are they staying at the table? Let's say it's 2 or 3 minutes. Maybe try to make their goal like 10 minutes. So, um, you could do, you could provide like a visual timer for them and say, okay, we're going to sit at the table for 10 minutes. You could also work on this outside of eating or meal times. So you could have them sit at the table doing an activity they really enjoy and just focus on working on sitting at the table. Then you could maybe, while they're doing that task, start to build in some of that eating at the table. So I would say just really try to start small, have a small achievable goal for them, and then just start building on that goal as you can. But just try to think about the reinforcement value of eating for them and see how you can build in some of that other reinforcement. Okay, I'm going to scroll back up here. So my son is 12. Okay. And puberty, yes. Puberty can be a whole different ballgame for sure. And managing that can be really, really tricky. So really, I would rely heavily on your BCBA. It's likely that they have, some resources that they can give you, or, some articles or different things that you guys can try. But for those specific questions, I would probably go to your BCBA and really figure out how you guys can start working on what's appropriate for your son together. This one says, when my daughter does not want to hear something, she covers her ears. Yeah, so it seems like she may have an aversion to certain sounds or loud sounds. So I think with something like closing her ears, that's just kind of a personal preference. It's not necessarily something that's going to hinder her learning or be disruptive to anybody else. But if it is something that you want to target her stopping, you could try to think about some strategies that you could teach her. So if she's good about vocally communicating, or she can follow prompts pretty well, you could just say, "Hey, hands down." And if she can't tolerate that, then maybe you could get her to start advocating to go to a quieter place or something like that. But I would say, yeah, if she doesn't want to hear something, she closes her ears. You could prompt her. You could just be like, "Hands down." Or if you have to get more intrusive, maybe you could just like tap her hands and see if she then puts them down. But I would just continue to work on it. I think with anything, if you start making something an expectation and you're really consistent about your follow through with something like that, then I think you're going to start seeing the results. But it may get a little harder before it gets easier. So just kind of know what you want your expectation to be. Um, okay. Yeah, so this one is about mentally functioning as like a 7-year-old, but being a 12-year-old. So that can be really tricky too. I would say focus more on their developmental age than you do their actual age, because really, if you're trying to jump ahead a bunch of steps, that's going to be really tricky for them. So again, specifically for him, I just work with your BCBA and see if they have any specific suggestions for him. Grips for my son to use on his eating utensils. So that's a really great question. I've seen some kids use them and have a lot of success, and I've seen some kids not use them. So if your child gets OT services, that would be somebody who is really great to ask. If not, you could go to your BCBA and see if they have any specific ideas about that or recommendations. Okay. Fine sitting in his high chair, but will not stay seated in a chair. Need ideas to keep him seated for a reasonable amount of time. Starting small and working up to time to eating his meal. So yeah, I would say I've seen a lot of kids have success with that visual timer. Like, okay, we're gonna sit, for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna get up. So, and then again, I would build in that reinforcement within the activity. So if you're having them sit in the high chair to eat, but that's not something they really love to do, then maybe have them, do something at the table that is exciting to them or reinforcing to them. So I would say just try to get sitting at the table to be fun for them before you build in the eating as well. Because if eating's not super fun for them and also sitting down and staying still isn't super fun for them, putting those two things together is definitely not going to be desirable for them. So think about ways that you can make each of those activities more fun, and build in that reinforcement. But also, I would say just set your expectation clear in the beginning and make sure that they know what the expectation is. So, hey, we're going to sit here for 10 minutes and then follow through with that. So, you can always kind of reassess motivation throughout, but I would say just try to remain as consistent as possible and let them know what the expectation is so that they know you're going to follow through. Um, all right. Well, thank you guys. Oh, it would be great to offer a meeting for puberty. I will definitely add that. We have a list of different topics. If you guys ever have topics that you're interested in, feel free to email them, to me, to your BCBA, whoever. But yeah, I appreciate you guys all spending your evening with me, and I hope this was helpful. Have a great night.